Have you ever felt invisible in a room full of people? Have you ever given your heart, your soul, your entire being to someone, only to be told you're simply not enough? This isn't just a story. This is a cautionary tale about what happens when a good woman is pushed too far. It's the story of Anna Vance, a woman erased from her own life by a husband who chased status and a family that craved pedigree. They cast her out into the cold, penniless, and broken. But they made one fatal mistake. They underestimated her. They never imagined she would return not as a ghost of the past, but as the future bride of a man who could buy and sell their entire world. Stay with me, because this is the story of how the ignored became the unforgettable. The crystal chandeliers of the Ashford estate dripped light like frozen tears onto the polished marble floors. It was the annual Ashford Foundation Gala, the crown jewel of the city's philanthropic scene, and Anna Vance, wife of the esteemed Julian Ashford, felt like a ghost haunting her own life. She smoothed down the silk of her simple navy blue dress, a dress Julian's mother Eleanor had pointedly called understated, with a smile that never reached her cold, calculating eyes. For 5 years Anna had tried to fit into the Ashford mold. She'd learned about vintages of wine she couldn't afford to drink, artists whose work felt hollow, and the art of smiling placidly while being systematically dismantled. Julian, the man she'd fallen in love with in college for his easy laugh and supposed kindness, was now a stranger in a bespoke suit standing across the room. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at Isabella Hawthorne. Isabella was everything Anna was not. Her laughter was loud and commanding, her red dress a slash of defiance in the sea of muted tones. Her father, Marcus Hawthorne, owned half the city's commercial real estate. She was, as Eleanor Ashford often reminded Julian, the right kind of girl. Anna watched them, a familiar cold knot tightening in her stomach. Julian leaned in, whispering something in Isabella's ear. Isabella threw her head back and laughed, her hand resting casually on Julian's arm. It wasn't the first time. For months, Isabella had been a permanent fixture, first as a business associate, then a family friend. Now the lines were so blurred they were non-existent. "Don't you look—" Quaint dear Eleanor's voice sliced through Anna's thoughts. The family matriarch stood beside her, holding a champagne flute like a weapon. "I do admire your commitment to simplicity. It's very on brand for your background." The insult was perfectly crafted, a silken dagger. Anna had grown up in a small town, the daughter of a librarian and a history teacher. Her world was books and quiet conversations, not stock portfolios and hostile takeovers. "Thank you, Eleanor," Anna said, her voice even. "I believe elegance doesn't need to shout." Eleanor's smile thinned. "No, but it does need to be seen. Julian is closing the Stratford deal tonight. It's a legacy-making moment. He needs a partner who reflects his stature, not a quiet shadow." The message was clear. Anna's very presence was a liability. She excused herself, needing air, and slipped onto the deserted terrace. The cold night air was a relief. A few moments later, the terrace doors opened again. It was Julian. "There you are," he said, his tone impatient. "Mother is looking for you. The photographer wants a family photo." "Does that family include Isabella now?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Julian sighed, the sound heavy with exasperation. "Anna, don't do this. Not tonight. Isabella is a friend. Her father is crucial to this deal." "And what am I? Julian, a placeholder until the deal is signed?" He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair. He wouldn't meet her eyes. "You're my wife." He said the words, but they were hollow, stripped of all meaning. "Then act like it," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Look at me. Really look at me and tell me you still love me." He finally looked at her, and in his eyes she saw the devastating truth. It wasn't hatred or anger. It was worse. It was apathy. He saw her, but he didn't see her. She was a piece of furniture he'd forgotten was in the room. "It's not working anymore, Anna," he said, his voice low and final. "I've tried. We've tried. We're just from different worlds." That was the line his mother had fed him for years. He was finally using it himself. The rest of the night was a blur. The fake smiles for the camera, the polite applause for Julian's speech, the way Isabella stood just a little too close to him on the stage. Anna felt like she was watching a movie of her life, and she was no longer the main character. 2 days later, the divorce papers arrived. They were delivered by a courier, cold and impersonal. Julian didn't even have the courage to face her. The terms were brutally efficient. She was to vacate the house within the week. The prenuptial agreement she'd signed without a second thought years ago was ironclad. She would receive a one-time payment of $50,000 a pittance, an insult designed to send her back to the obscurity from which she came. She was to take only her personal belongings. As she packed her life into 2 suitcases, she walked past the grand paintings and antique furniture. Her gaze fell on a small, dusty landscape painting in the guest room. It was a gift from her grandfather, an amateur artist, which she'd brought with her when she married. The Ashfords had deemed it worthless and banished it from the main living areas. It was hers. She took it off the wall. Her last act in the house was leaving her wedding ring on the pristine marble kitchen island. As she closed the heavy oak door behind her, the sound echoed with finality. She was no longer Mrs. Ashford. She was just Anna Vance, ignored, discarded, and utterly alone. The city skyline loomed indifferent to her pain. They thought they had erased her. They had no idea they had just set her free. The first few months were a study in gray. The $50,000 after finding a small damp apartment on the outskirts of the city and paying the deposits felt less like a severance and more like a countdown to destitution. The vibrant world of galas and charity events was replaced by the flickering fluorescent lights of the grocery store and the lonely hum of a second-hand laptop. Anna's only anchor was her best friend Chloe. Chloe, a sharp-witted journalist who had never trusted the Ashfords, opened her tiny apartment to Anna without a second thought. "They're vipers," Chloe said one night, pouring them both cheap red wine into coffee mugs. "They didn't just divorce you, they tried to delete you. Did you see the latest society pages? Julian and Isabella Hawthorne are the city's newest power couple. They even photoshopped you out of a picture from last year's gala." Anna stared into her mug. She had seen it. The digital erasure felt almost more violent than the real one. It was a public declaration that she had never mattered. The humiliation was a physical weight pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. For weeks she did nothing but drift. She applied for administrative jobs she was overqualified for and received polite rejections. The Ashford name, once a golden key, was now a lead weight. No one wanted to hire the ex-wife of Julian Ashford, especially when his new Flames family held so much influence. "What did you love to do before him?" Chloe asked gently, trying to break through the fog of despair. Anna thought back. Before the pressure to be the perfect corporate wife, before the endless dinners and suffocating expectations, there was art. Design. She'd studied interior design in college, her final portfolio praised for its innovative use of space and light. She had a talent for seeing the potential in forgotten things, for bringing warmth and life to empty rooms. She'd given it up because Eleanor had called it a frivolous hobby. "I liked making spaces feel like homes." Anna said the words feeling foreign in her mouth. The next day, Chloe dragged her to a local coffee shop, The Daily Grind, which was in desperate need of a makeover. The owner, a gruff but kind man named Sal, was complaining about losing customers to the new sleek chain that had opened down the street. "I'll do it for free," Anna heard herself say. "Just cover the cost of materials. Let me redesign this place." Sal looked at her, then at the peeling paint and mismatched furniture, and shrugged. "Kid, what have I got to lose?" For the next month, Anna poured every ounce of her pain and frustration into that coffee shop. She haunted flea markets and thrift stores, finding hidden gems, old chairs she could reupholster, vintage tables she could refinish. She painted the walls a warm, inviting teal, designed a new lighting scheme with soft, ambient fixtures, and built a cozy reading nook in a forgotten corner. She hung her grandfather's landscape painting behind the counter, its quiet beauty a silent act of defiance. She worked until her hands were raw and her body ached, but for the first time in years she felt alive. She wasn't Julian Ashford's wife, or Eleanor's disappointment. She was a creator, a builder. When she was done, the transformation was staggering. The daily grind was reborn. It was warm, eclectic, and full of character. Customers started pouring in, drawn by the inviting atmosphere. A blogger from a local design magazine wrote a glowing feature on the hidden gem with $1 million feel. The article didn't mention Anna by name, only referring to a gifted local designer. But it was enough. The feature was a tiny spark in the darkness. It led to a small commission to redesign a boutique, then another to stage a home for a real estate agent. She established a small one-woman firm, Vance Interiors, operating out of her tiny apartment. Each project was a brick in the foundation of her new life. She wasn't making a fortune, but she was paying her bills. She was surviving. One afternoon, while sourcing fabrics, she saw a headline on a magazine stand. It was a glossy photo of Julian and Isabella announcing their engagement. The ring was a monstrous diamond, a vulgar display of wealth. The article quoted Julian, with Isabella, "I've finally found a partner who understands my world, who complements my ambition." The words were a direct shot meant to wound, and they did. But as Anna looked at the photo, at Julian's tight, forced smile and Isabella's triumphant smirk, she felt something new alongside the pain. Pity. They were trapped in a gilded cage of their own, making a world built on transactions and appearances. Her world, though small and humble, was real. It was built with her own two hands. She turned away from the magazine rack and walked back to her workshop. The spark of her new life wasn't just about survival anymore. She realized she didn't want to just survive their memory. She wanted to thrive so brightly that their world would be nothing but a shadow in her own brilliant light. The art of disappearing was over. It was time to start the art of becoming. 3 years passed. 3 years of relentless work. Vance Interiors was no longer a one-woman operation run from a cramped apartment. Anna had cultivated a reputation for her unique style, a blend of classic elegance and warm, modern livability. She specialized in soulful spaces, environments that reflected the character of their inhabitants, not just the latest trends. Her name was whispered in exclusive circles, a secret weapon for those who wanted taste, not just ostentation. She had moved into a chic loft in the Arts District, which doubled as her studio. She was successful, respected, and for the most part content. The Ashfords were a distant memory, a scar that had faded to a thin silver line. The call that changed everything came on a Tuesday morning. The voice on the other end was clipped professional and had an unmistakable French accent. "This is Jean-Pierre Dubois, executive assistant to Mr. Damian Chevalier. Mr. Chevalier has been following your work and would like to discuss a potential commission." Anna almost dropped her phone. Damian Chevalier wasn't just a name. He was a legend. A mysterious self-made billionaire with a global empire spanning tech, luxury hotels, and sustainable energy. He was notoriously private, rarely photographed, and known for his impeccable, almost severe taste. To be noticed by him was like being an amateur astronomer who discovers a new galaxy. "Of course," she said, her voice betraying none of her shock. "I'd be happy to discuss the project." The meeting was set for the following week at the Chevalier Group's headquarters, a sleek, imposing skyscraper that pierced the clouds. The penthouse suite where Chevalier lived was the subject of the commission. When she was shown into his office, she was struck by two things. First, the room was stark minimalist to the point of being cold. It was a space designed for function, not comfort. Second, the man behind the vast obsidian desk was not what she expected. He was younger, perhaps in his late 30s, with intense dark eyes that seemed to see right through you. He had an air of quiet power, a stillness that was more intimidating than any display of aggression. He was dressed in a simple, perfectly tailored dark suit, no tie. "Ms. Vance, Damian Chevalier," said, his voice a low baritone. He gestured to the chair opposite him. "Thank you for coming." He didn't waste time with small talk. "I've seen your work, the redesign of the Artesian Hotel's lobby, the restoration of the old public library. You don't just decorate, you interpret. You find the story of a space. Anna was taken aback by his knowledge of her portfolio. That's what I aim to do, Mr. Chevalier. My home, he said, gesturing vaguely towards the ceiling, is efficient. It is secure. It is sterile. It is a place I reside, not a place I live. I purchased it complete with the furnishings. It has no story, or rather it has a story I did not write. He paused, his gaze unwavering. I want you to give it a soul. This was the commission of a lifetime. The budget was, Jean-Pierre had hinted, practically unlimited. But it was the challenge that excited her. To create a home for a man who seemed to have everything but that. For the next few weeks, Anna immersed herself in the project. But to design a home for Damian Chevalier, she needed to understand him. Their professional meetings began to blur into something more personal. He was fiercely intelligent with a dry, unexpected wit. She learned he'd grown up with nothing, building his empire from scratch with a brilliant mind and an unshakable will. He too knew what it was like to be an outsider, to be underestimated. He was fascinated by her process, by the way she talked about textures and light. He would watch silent and observant as she sketched ideas or explained why a certain piece of reclaimed wood held more character than a polished slab of marble. One evening they were looking over fabric swatches in the cavernous, empty living room of the penthouse. "You're an artist," he stated, not as a compliment but as a fact. "I'm a designer," she corrected gently. "No," he insisted, his eyes meeting hers. "An artist sees what is not there and brings it into being. That is what you do." "Where did you learn to see the world this way?" She hesitated, then found herself telling him about her childhood, about her grandfather, who taught her to paint, who told her that every object had a history. And then she told him about Julian. She told him how that part of herself had been buried, deemed a frivolous hobby, by a family that valued only status and acquisition. Damian listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. When she finished, there was a long silence. "To ignore such a gift in someone," he said finally, his voice laced with a cold anger that startled her, "is not just a failure of judgment. It is a failure of character." In that moment, Anna felt something shift. He wasn't just seeing her portfolio or her skills. He was seeing her. The parts of her she had hidden away, the parts the Ashfords had tried to extinguish. The penthouse project became a collaboration. It transformed from a cold glass box into a sophisticated sanctuary filled with bespoke furniture, rich textures, contemporary art, and personal touches that spoke of Damian's journey. It was a space that was both luxurious and deeply personal. It had a soul. On the day she officially completed the project, Damian met her in the finished space. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the warm wood and soft fabrics. "It's more than I could have imagined," he said, his gaze sweeping the room before settling on her. "Thank you, Anna." "It was a privilege, Damian," she said, a professional smile on her face. "My payment is being transferred to your account," he continued, walking closer. "But I find myself in a predicament. You have built me a home, a place I finally wish to spend time in. But a home is not meant to be enjoyed alone." Her heart began to beat a little faster. "I am returning to your old city for a few months," he said, his voice dropping slightly. "The Chevalier Group is launching a major philanthropic initiative there. There will be a gala to announce it. It's the kind of event I typically detest. All posturing and false smiles." He paused, his dark eyes searching her face. "But I would find it far more tolerable if you would accompany me as my guest." Anna's mind raced. Her old city, a gala, the world she had run from. The thought terrified her. But then she looked at Damian, at the quiet strength in his eyes, and the fear was replaced by something else. A thrill. A sense of poetic justice. "I'm not sure I'm ready to go back," she said honestly. "You were never the one who was unprepared, Anna," he said softly. "They were. Allow me to reintroduce you to them." He held out his hand. "Let them see the woman you've become." She looked at his outstretched hand, then back at his face. This wasn't just an invitation, it was a challenge. a chance to rewrite the ending to her own story. She placed her hand in his. "Okay, Damian, I'll go with you." The flight to her former home city on Damian's private jet was surreal. Below them, the familiar skyline grew closer, a constellation of lights that once represented her deepest humiliation. Now sitting across from Damian in the quiet, luxurious cabin, it felt different. It felt like a stage being set. During the flight, Damian wasn't just a client or a date, he was a strategist. "The Ashford family will be at this gala," he stated, looking up from a tablet displaying the event's guest list. Julian and his wife, Isabella Hawthorne Ashford, are on the host committee. Her father's company is a primary sponsor. Anna's stomach clenched. Of course they are. Their world is built on perception. Anna, Damian said, his tone analytical. Their power is derived from who they know who acknowledges them. When we walk into that room, we are not just attending a party. We are making a statement. And what statement is that? She asked, her voice quiet. That their judgment is worthless. That the person they discarded is now beyond their reach. That their social currency is about to be devalued. He leaned forward slightly. But it will only work if you are ready. If they see a flicker of fear or uncertainty in you, they will feel victorious. You must be untouchable. The words were harsh, but they were also a shield. He was arming her. They landed and were whisked away to a penthouse suite at the city's most exclusive hotel, one Damian owned. For the next few days, a quiet whirlwind of activity surrounded Anna. A stylist Damian trusted flew in from Paris with a collection of gowns. A jeweler delivered a velvet case of understated but breathtakingly expensive pieces. It wasn't about creating a costume. It was about finding an external expression for the woman she had become. She chose a gown of deep emerald green, a color that symbolized renewal and growth. It was elegant, powerful, and utterly sophisticated. With her hair styled in a chic modern updo and wearing a simple diamond necklace that rested at the collarbone, she looked in the mirror and saw a stranger she recognized. It was her, but fortified. The night of the gala, Damian came to her suite. He was dressed in a classic black tuxedo that made him look like he'd stepped out of a movie. He stopped dead in the doorway, his eyes taking her in. For the first time, she saw something beyond his usual stoic composure. He looked captivated. "Anna," he said, his voice a low murmur, "you are exquisite." He held out a small velvet box. Inside was not a piece of jewelry, but a single perfect gardenia fashioned into a corsage. "My mother loved gardenias," he said softly. She said they represented grace and strength. It was the most personal gesture he had ever made. She let him pin it to her dress, his fingers warm against the cool silk. In the car on the way to the Grand Metropolitan Hall, a silence fell between them. Damian and Anna began needing to voice the question that had been hovering for weeks. "Why are you doing all of this for me?" He turned to face her, the city lights sliding across his sharp features. "When I was 22, I developed a software algorithm that I knew would change data security. I took it to a major firm. The CEO, a man who inherited his position, looked at my worn-out shoes and cheap suit and dismissed my presentation in 5 minutes. He told me I didn't have the right background to play in his league. 2 years later, I sold my company to his biggest competitor for 9 figures and put his firm out of business." He paused. "I have a deep-seated intolerance for people who judge value based on pedigree instead of merit. The Ashfords, they are that CEO. What they did to you was not just cruel. It was an act of profound stupidity. This isn't just for you, Anna. It's for me, too. It's a matter of principle." His confession forged a new, deeper bond between them. This wasn't a fairy tale rescue. It was a partnership, an alliance. "There is one more thing," he said as the car slowed to a stop in front of the venue. "Tonight, the press will be everywhere. They will ask questions. I would like your permission to give them an answer they will not forget." "What answer?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. "I would like to introduce you as my fiancé." Anna's breath hitched. She stared at him, searching his face for any hint of a joke. There was none. He was completely serious. "Damian, that's not—" "I know," he said calmly. "It would be for now an arrangement. a strategic move to provide you with an unassailable position. No one questions a fiancé. No one dares to gossip about the future Mrs. Chevalier. It would be a shield of solid gold. Of course, he added a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes if over time the arrangement were to become something more real. I would not be opposed. The proposition hung in the air between them. It was audacious. It was insane. It was also brilliant. To return not just as a successful designer on the arm of a powerful man, but as his chosen partner, his future wife. It was the ultimate checkmate. She thought of Eleanor's smug smile, of Julian's dismissive apathy, of Isabella's triumphant sneer. She thought of the cold, lonely nights and the struggle to rebuild. She looked at Damian, this formidable, brilliant man who saw her worth when no one else had. A man who was offering her not just his arm, but his name as a weapon and a shield. A strange, exhilarating sense of power surged through her. "The press will want to see a ring," she said, her voice steady. A slow smile spread across Damian's face. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a black ring box. He opened it. Inside, nestled on black velvet, was the most magnificent ring she had ever seen. It was a flawless emerald-cut diamond flanked by 2 smaller sapphires. It was elegant, timeless, and powerful. It looked like it was made for her. "I am a man who comes prepared," he said. He slipped the ring onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. "So, Ms. Vance," Damian said, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. "Are you ready to make an entrance?" Anna took a deep breath, the weight of the ring on her finger a tangible reminder of the power she now wielded. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I am." The doors to the Grand Metropolitan Hall swung open. The sound of a string quartet and the low hum of hundreds of conversations washed over them. Light from the dozen chandeliers glinted off champagne flutes and sparkling jewels. For a moment it was exactly as Anna remembered, a glittering, predatory sea. But this time she wasn't drowning in it. She was walking on water. Their entrance did not go unnoticed. A ripple of silence spread from the doorway, a wave of whispers following in its wake. All eyes turned to the striking couple who had just arrived. First they saw Damian Chevalier, the almost mythical billionaire, making a rare public appearance. The sight of him alone was enough to cause a stir. But then they saw the woman on his arm. They saw her elegant emerald gown, the confident set of her shoulders, the serene smile on her face. Recognition dawned on their faces, followed by disbelief, then pure, unadulterated shock. It was Anna Vance, the discarded wife, the woman who had simply vanished. Anna kept her eyes fixed forward, her hand resting lightly on Damian's arm. She could feel the stares like physical touches. She could hear the gasps and the frantic, hushed questions. "Is that? My God, it's her. What is she doing with him?" They moved through the room, a bubble of stunned silence traveling with them. Damian nodded curtly at a few acquaintances, his expression unreadable, his presence a clear sign that Anna was under his protection. And then she saw them. The Ashfords. They were holding court near the grand staircase, Julian, Isabella, and Eleanor, a triumvirate of arrogance. Isabella was laughing, her hand possessively on Julian's chest. Eleanor was surveying the room with the air of a queen surveying her subjects. Their laughter died as they saw the commotion near the entrance. Julian's eyes widened, his champagne glass freezing halfway to his lips. Isabella's smile vanished, replaced by a look of confused fury. But it was Eleanor's reaction that Anna would savor for the rest of her life. The matriarch's perfectly composed face slackened, her eyes narrowing into slits of pure venom and disbelief. She looked as if she had seen a ghost who had come back to haunt her dressed in couture. Damian steered Anna directly towards them. There was no avoiding this. It was a deliberate, calculated move, a confrontation on their home turf. As they approached, the small circle around the Ashfords fell silent, watching the impending collision with breathless anticipation. "Julian," Eleanor, Damian said, his voice calm and carrying. "A pleasure." His gaze was glacial. He completely ignored Isabella. Julian stared at Anna, speechless. He looked her up and down, taking in the gown, the confidence, the impossible reality of her presence. He looked like a man seeing a black-and-white photograph suddenly burst into vivid, brilliant color. Eleanor recovered first, her lips curling into a facsimile of a smile. "Anna." "What a surprise. We hadn't heard you were back in town." The unspoken addendum was, or that you were still relevant. "I'm here on business," Anna replied, her voice smooth as silk. She felt a strange sense of detachment, as if she were watching a scene from a play. Business. Isabella scoffed, finally finding her voice. She stepped forward, linking her arm possessively through Julian's. "Don't tell me you're waiting tables now." The insult was childish, pathetic. Before Anna could respond, Damian spoke. "On the contrary," he said, his voice cutting through the tension. "Ms. Vance is the creative visionary behind the redesign of my new hotel portfolio, starting with the Chevalier Grand in Paris." A collective intake of breath came from the onlookers. The Chevalier Grand was the most anticipated luxury hotel opening in a decade. Isabella's face paled. Julian looked as though he'd been slapped. This was not the broken, penniless woman they had cast aside. This was a major player working with one of the most powerful men in the world. "And I find her vision so compelling," Damian continued, his timing impeccable, "that our professional partnership has become a personal one." He raised Anna's left hand, which he had been holding. The magnificent ring caught the light, sending out shards of emerald and blue fire. "Allow me to introduce my fiancée, Anna Vance." The explosion was silent but deafening. Jaws dropped. Whispers erupted into a roar. A camera flashed from across the room, a society photographer capturing the moment for eternity. Julian's face was a mask of utter devastation. He stared at the ring, then at Anna's serene face, and then at Damian's possessive hand on her arm. In that one moment, the full crushing weight of his mistake seemed to land on him. He hadn't just divorced a quiet, unassuming woman. He had discarded a hidden treasure. A treasure another man, a far greater man, had unearthed and now displayed as his most prized possession. Eleanor looked apoplectic, her face flushed with rage. Her perfectly ordered world, her carefully constructed social hierarchy had just been blown apart. The woman she had deemed unworthy was now engaged to a man whose fortune dwarfed their own 100 times over. Anna hadn't just climbed the ladder, she had bought the entire building. Anna met Julian's gaze for a brief final moment. She saw regret. She saw shock. She saw the pathetic, dawning horror of a man who had traded a diamond for a piece of glass. She felt no triumph, no desire for revenge. She just felt nothing. He was a stranger, a footnote in a chapter of her life that was now firmly closed. She turned her back on them, allowing Damian to lead her towards the center of the ballroom. As they walked away, she heard Isabella's shrill, panicked voice, "Julian." Julian say something, but Julian said nothing. The power in the room had shifted decisively and irrevocably. The ghost had returned not for a haunting, but for a coronation. And the Ashfords were now the ones who were invisible. The morning after the gala, the city was buzzing. The photo of Damian Chevalier presenting Anna's ring with the thunderstruck faces of Julian and Isabella in the background was on the front page of every society blog and newspaper. The headline read, "The Phoenix and the Prince Anna Vance's shocking return as Billionaire Chevalier's bride-to-be." The narrative was set. Anna was not the discarded ex. She was the triumphant heroine of a real-life fairy tale. For the Ashfords, the fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Their world, so reliant on image and influence, began to fracture. Julian arrived at his office at Ashford Investments to find his board of directors in a state of panic. Marcus Hawthorne, his father-in-law, was on a speakerphone, his voice booming with fury. "What in God's name happened last night, Julian? Do you have any idea what this looks like?" "Marcus, it was a shock to everyone," Julian began. "A shock. My daughter is a laughingstock. The Chevalier Group just announced they are launching a competitive bid for the Stratford waterfront project. The very deal our entire merger was based on. The deal you were supposed to be securing with my backing. Julian felt the blood drain from his face. The Stratford project was his magnum opus, the deal that would cement his legacy. Chevalier wasn't interested in Stratford. Well, he is now. Hawthorne roared. He's doing it to spite you. And with Anna Vance's design firm rumored to be the lead on the aesthetic and environmental planning, his bid is suddenly looking a lot more attractive to the city council. You didn't just lose a wife, you idiot. You created an enemy and you handed her a nuclear weapon named Damian Chevalier. The call ended. Julian sank into his leather chair, the weight of his father-in-law's words crushing him. He had always seen Anna as a soft, gentle presence, a background character in his ambitious life. He never once considered that she possessed strength, only that she lacked the hard, glittering edge he thought he needed. He had chosen Isabella for her connections, for the brute force of her family's wealth. Now Anna's connection dwarfed his 1,000 times over. The situation at home was even worse. Isabella was a tempest of rage and insecurity. "How could you let this happen?" she screamed, throwing a crystal vase against the wall of their sterile white apartment. "You told me she was nothing. A nobody from some pathetic little town. Now she's plastered everywhere with him I didn't know. Bella," Julian said, weary to his bones. "Don't you dare call me that," she shrieked. "Everyone is pitying me. Pitying me. They're all saying he upgraded and you downgraded." The word hung in the air, a poisoned dart that found its mark. It was the cruelest thing she could have said, because Julian knew in the deepest pit of his stomach that it was true. He looked around the apartment Isabella had decorated, all sharp angles, chrome, and cold marble. It was a showroom, not a home. He suddenly remembered the warmth Anna had brought to their old house, the small touches, the way she could make any room feel like a sanctuary. He had traded soul for status, and now he was losing both. His mother, Eleanor, was fighting a war on a different front. Her phone was ringing off the hook with calls from her society friends, their voices dripping with false sympathy that barely concealed their glee. Her reign as the city's social queen was over. She had been publicly humiliated by the very woman she had so ruthlessly ousted. In her world, there was no greater sin. Desperate, Julian did the unthinkable. He found out where Anna was staying and went to the hotel. He waited in the lobby for hours until he finally saw her walking in alone. "Anna," he called out, his voice hoarse. She turned, her expression calm, impassive. She was no longer the woman who would have flinched at his tone. "Julian, what are you doing here? I need to talk to you, please." He looked pathetic, a shell of the confident man he once was. "What he's doing? Chevalier, he's trying to ruin me. The Stratford deal. My company. Is that what you think this is about?" she asked, her voice devoid of emotion. "A corporate takeover. What else could it be? This is revenge. You're using him to get back at me." Anna almost laughed. The sheer arrogance of it, the way he still saw himself as the center of her universe. "You give yourself too much credit, Julian," she said, her voice cutting. "My life does not revolve around you. It hasn't for a very long time. Damian is interested in the Stratford project because it's a good investment, and he believes my vision for a sustainable community-focused development is superior to your plan for another soulless block of luxury condos. I made a mistake, Anna." He stammered, his desperation palpable. "I was a fool. I was pressured by my mother, by everyone. Isabella, she's not you." "No, she's not," Anna agreed. "She is exactly who you chose. You chose ambition over love. You chose status over partnership. You chose a balance sheet over a soul. Those were your choices, Julian. Not mine." He reached out, trying to touch her arm. "We can fix this. I can leave her. We can—" Anna pulled her arm back as if his touch were toxic. For the first time, a flicker of genuine anger showed in her eyes. "There is no we. she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You destroyed we when you handed me divorce papers like I was a business transaction you were liquidating. You want to know the real tragedy, Julian? I would have stood by you through anything, failure, struggle, anything. The one thing I couldn't tolerate was being invisible. And now, she gave him a slow, deliberate look up and down. Now it is your turn to feel what that is like. She turned and walked towards the elevators, not once looking back. Julian stood alone in the grand lobby, the Ashfords' empire cracking around him, finally understanding the true cost of what he had thrown away. He had not just lost a wife, he had lost the best part of himself. The Stratford waterfront was a place of ghosts and promises. The salty wind whipping in from the bay carried the scent of brine and damp earth. Skeletal frames of abandoned warehouses stood silhouetted against a pale, overcast sky, their broken windows like vacant eyes staring out at the restless gray water. It was a place of decay, but to Anna it was a canvas of immense potential. Here, where the city had turned its back, she envisioned parks, public art spaces, and beautiful, sustainable homes. It was a project about reclamation, about seeing the beauty in what had been forgotten, a theme that resonated in the very marrow of her bones. She was discussing foundation logistics with her lead architect when a long, gleaming black town car, incongruous against the backdrop of rust and rubble, pulled to a stop. It was a vehicle that belonged to a different world, a world of manicured lawns and silent, judgmental corridors. Anna knew who it was before the door even opened. Eleanor Ashford emerged, her slim figure wrapped in a cashmere coat that seemed to battle the aggressive wind. She looked older, the strain of the past few weeks having etched fine lines around her eyes and mouth, but her posture was still ramrod straight, a fortress of defiant pride. She picked her way through the uneven terrain as if walking on glass, her expression one of utter distaste. "Leave us," Anna said quietly to her team. They packed their schematics and retreated, casting curious glances over their shoulders. "I need a word with you," Eleanor said as she finally reached Anna. Her voice was thin and brittle, stripped of its usual condescending warmth. "You found me," Anna replied, her tone neutral. She did not feel anger or fear, only a profound sense of distance, as if observing a character from a book she had long since finished reading. "You have 5 minutes, Eleanor. This is a working site." The implied dismissal, the subtle shift in power dynamics, did not go unnoticed. A flicker of indignation crossed Eleanor's face before being suppressed. All of this has to stop," she began, her gesture encompassing the waterfront project, the press, the entire spectacular implosion of her family's reputation. "This vendetta of yours, it's unbecoming." "A vendetta." Anna's laugh was a short, sharp sound carried away by the wind. "You mistake consequence for intention, Eleanor. I have simply been living my life. The fact that my success happens to illuminate your family's failures is a circumstance of your own creation. Don't be naive." Eleanor snapped, her composure cracking. "You've made your point. You've had your little revenge, humiliated my son, and dragged our name through the mud. What more could you possibly want? Is it money? Is that what this has always been about? Fine." She reached into her designer handbag. "Name your price. A check. A trust. Whatever it takes to make you and your benefactor go away." The offer, so crude and transactional, was the purest distillation of Eleanor's worldview. Anna looked out at the water for a long moment, watching a lone gull fight against the current. "You still don't see it, do you?" she said, turning back to face the older woman. "Even now, after everything. You believe the world operates on a ledger of debits and credits. You have a fundamental misunderstanding of what is truly valuable." "Oh, please," Eleanor sneered, her voice dripping with disdain. "Spare me the sentimental sermon. You're engaged to one of the wealthiest men on the planet. Don't pretend you're above the allure of money. You played the long game and hit the jackpot. I should almost be impressed." The difference between you and me, Eleanor, is that my relationship with Damian is not an asset on a balance sheet. I would be with him if he had nothing. You, on the other hand, wouldn't have let your son marry me if my last name had been Rockefeller. You don't value people. You value pedigree. You don't see individuals. You see acquisitions. And your greatest failing is that you are a terrible appraiser of worth. Anna's words were calm, precise, and they struck their target with devastating accuracy. She saw it in the tightening of Eleanor's jaw, the sudden pallor of her skin. You called me a nobody, Anna continued, her voice steady against the wind. A girl from a small town with no connections. You said I was holding Julian back. But was I? Or was I the only person in his life who saw him as a man, not a legacy? The person who would have supported his passions, not just his profit margins. You're the one who held him back, Eleanor. You hollowed out your own son and taught him to value the frame more than the painting. The catastrophe your family is facing now, you were its primary architect. As she spoke, Anna thought of the one physical object she had carried out of that cold, lonely mansion, her grandfather's small, dusty painting. It had been her one tangible link to a life before the Ashfords, a life of warmth and genuine affection. During her years of struggle, she'd taken it to an appraiser simply to ensure the one thing of sentimental value she owned. The old man had cleaned a small corner, looked through his loupe, and then slowly, reverently taken off his glasses. He'd informed her that her grandfather, a humble history teacher, had been a lifelong friend of the then unknown post-impressionist Robert Chenier. The painting was not a tribute by her grandfather. It was an original early Chenier, a gift from one friend to another. It was a masterpiece of quiet, unrecognized genius, and it was worth over $3 million. Anna reached into the leather portfolio she carried and pulled out a thick manila envelope. I believe this belongs to you, or rather, it's the final piece of our history. Eleanor looked at the envelope with suspicion, as if it might contain an explosive. Hesitantly, she took it. Inside, she found not a legal threat or a demand, but a sheaf of documents, a high-resolution photograph of the painting, the official notarized valuation from a world-renowned auction house, and a letter of authentication. At the very top was a deed of gift. That painting, Anna said, her voice soft but clear, hung in your guest room for 5 years. You once referred to it as that worthless little thing. It was surrounded by works you and your consultants had spent millions on, a collection you curated to broadcast your exquisite taste. Yet that worthless painting is now valued at more than what's left of Ashford Investments. Eleanor's face went completely white. She stared at the paper, her perfectly manicured hands trembling slightly. It wasn't just the staggering monetary value that shocked her. It was the sheer damning symbolism of it all. It was irrefutable proof of her own blindness. It hung in your home and you never saw it. Anna pressed on her voice, devoid of triumph, only a profound, final sadness. You saw a cheap frame and a no-name artist. You couldn't see the genius in the brushstrokes, the soul in the landscape. You looked right at it day after day and you saw nothing of value, just like you looked at me. With that, Anna's final message was delivered. She had not come back to destroy them. Their own shallow values had been the instrument of their ruin. The painting has been donated, Anna added, delivering the final quiet blow. The proceeds will establish a new arts foundation for underprivileged children, so that young people with talent, regardless of their background, will have a chance to be seen. She didn't need to say anything more. She had won, but it felt less like a victory and more like a closing statement. She left Eleanor Ashford standing alone on the windy, desolate waterfront, clutching a piece of paper that was the final receipt for her family's true bankruptcy, a bankruptcy of vision, of heart, and of soul. That evening, Anna stood with Damian on the balcony of the penthouse that was now their home. The sterile space she had first encountered was gone, replaced by a sanctuary filled with warmth, books, art they had chosen together, and the quiet hum of a shared life. She told him about the meeting with Eleanor. He listened, his arm wrapped securely around her, his presence a comforting, solid weight. She saw you as a liability. Damian said, his voice a low murmur against her hair. It's the fatal flaw of the arrogant. They cannot comprehend that their greatest assets are often the very things they overlook. He turned her to face him, his dark eyes filled with a love that was both fierce and tender. Our engagement, it started as a strategy. A shield of solid gold, she whispered, remembering his words in the car. Yes, he smiled. But it was a terrible strategy. Why, she asked, a playful light in her eyes. Because it implied there was ever a choice. From the moment I saw you command a room with your ideas, I knew. There was no arrangement, Anna. Not for me. It was always going to be you. Their fake engagement had seamlessly, effortlessly become the most real and profound truth of their lives. Their upcoming wedding would be the opposite of the Ashford Gala, a small private ceremony on the coast with only their closest friends. It would be a celebration not of a merger of fortunes, but of a meeting of souls. Anna leaned her head on his shoulder, looking out at the sprawling constellation of city lights below. The skyline no longer looked like an indifferent giant or a battlefield she had conquered. It looked like a map of her journey. She was not a trophy bride. She was not the product of a fairy tale. She was an architect of spaces, of businesses, and of her own incredible hard-won life. The woman who was once a ghost had finally inherited her own worth, and it was a fortune no one could ever take away. And so Anna's story isn't just about revenge. It's a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit. It's about finding your own worth when the world tells you that you have none. She didn't need a billionaire to save her. She saved herself first. Damian Chevalier wasn't her rescuer. He was the partner who arrived after she had already won her own war. Her victory wasn't just in returning to the top, but in redefining what the top meant for her. It wasn't about money or status, but about self-respect, passion, and the quiet, unshakable strength that comes from building a life on your own terms. If Anna's journey from being ignored to being unforgettable resonated with you, please show your support. Hit that like button, share this story with someone who needs to be reminded of their own strength, and subscribe for more stories of triumph and transformation. What was your favorite twist in her story? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for listening.